The 4 small pieces of paper lay on the sterile airport floor, like fallen leaves stark white against the grey linoleum. They represented more than just a flight. They were proof of a dream, meticulously planned, a reward hard-earned. For 8-year-old Zoe, they were tickets to see real snow-capped mountains. For 5-year-old Leo, they were the key to riding in the cockpit of a giant metal bird. For Dr. Amara and David Stewart, they were the promise of a precious week of peace. But now, they were just scraps destroyed by the sneering woman behind the counter. And in that moment, as her children's tears began to fall, Amara Stewart made a decision. She would not yell. She would not cry. She would make one single phone call that would not only change their day, but would end a career and send a multi-billion-dollar corporation into a panicked tailspin. The air in the Stewarts' suburban New Jersey home had been buzzing with a unique frequency for weeks, a blend of joyful anticipation and meticulous planning. This wasn't just any vacation. It was the vacation. Dr. Amara Stewart, one of the country's leading pediatric neurosurgeons, had been invited to be the keynote speaker at a prestigious medical symposium in Geneva, Switzerland. It was an honor she had worked tirelessly for, a culmination of years spent in operating rooms under intense pressure and long nights poring over research papers. Instead of traveling alone, her husband David, a successful architect known for his sustainable urban designs, had an idea. "Let's make it a family adventure," he'd said, his eyes crinkling with warmth. "You give your speech, we applaud the loudest, and then we disappear into the Alps for a week. No phones, no schedules. Just us, the mountains, and an obscene amount of Swiss chocolate." The idea had taken root and blossomed into a full-blown expedition of joy. For 8-year-old Zoe, a budding artist who saw the world in shades of color and emotion, it was a chance to fill a brand-new sketchbook with drawings of chalets and mountains, a departure from the familiar cityscapes of New York she knew so well. 5-year-old Leo, a boisterous bundle of energy obsessed with anything that had wings, was fixated on a single goal: flying first class. They had saved their airline miles for years, a joint pot of points from Amara's conference travel and David's business trips, cashing them all in for this once-in-a-lifetime experience. The splurge was worth it. For Amara, the extra space meant a chance to review her notes on the flight. For David, it meant not having to contort his 6'3" frame into a pretzel for 9 hours. For the kids, it was pure magic. The morning of the flight was a symphony of controlled chaos. Suitcases packed and repacked stood by the door, like soldiers awaiting deployment. Zoe had triple-checked that her watercolor set was nestled securely between her sweaters. Leo was already wearing the junior pilot wings he'd been given on a previous flight, convinced it would grant him special access to the cockpit. Amara paused amidst the flurry, watching her family. David was on his knees, patiently explaining to Leo why his giant foam airplane couldn't come as a carry-on. Zoe was carefully placing a handmade "Good Luck Mummy" card into Amara's briefcase. A profound sense of gratitude washed over her. These moments, this life, were what she fought for. The grueling hours, the life-or-death decisions in the OR, they were all to protect this precious, vibrant world she and David had built. The journey to John F. Kennedy International Airport was filled with the kind of giddy energy that only precedes a grand adventure. They sang along to animated movie soundtracks, played I Spy with the passing city sights, and debated which type of Swiss cheese was superior. Even the notorious New York traffic couldn't dampen their spirits. Walking into the GSA Global Sky Alliance terminal was like stepping into another world. The cavernous space echoed with the cacophony of a dozen languages, the rumble of rolling suitcases and the tinny announcements of departures and arrivals. They navigated the check-in process with ease, their first-class designation affording them a blessedly short line. The agent who checked their bags was a cheerful man with a wide smile who complimented Leo on his pilot wings and wished Amara luck on her speech. It was a smooth, pleasant start, reinforcing their excitement. After clearing security, they made their way to the GSA flagship lounge. Here, the frantic energy of the main terminal faded into a hushed calm. The kids' eyes went wide at the buffet of snacks and drinks, while Amara and David found a quiet corner with a view of the tarmac. Giant jets gleaming in the afternoon sun gracefully taxied, took off, and landed. "Look, Leo," David pointed. "That one's an Airbus A350. See the curved wingtips?" Leo pressed his face against the glass, utterly mesmerized. "Is that the one we're going on?" "Daddy, even bigger," David grinned. "We're on the Boeing 777, the big boss." Amara sipped her coffee, a rare moment of stillness in her hectic life. She looked at her husband, his face animated as he shared his love of engineering with their son. She watched Zoe, already engrossed in her sketchbook, attempting to capture the complex lines of a 747's iconic hump. Everything was perfect. They were a successful, happy black family, embarking on a journey they had earned many times over. They were blissfully unaware that in less than an hour, at Gate 42, their perfect day was about to collide with a wall of pure, unadulterated malice, personified by a gate agent named Brenda Jenkins. The world they knew, one built on merit, hard work, and mutual respect, was about to be challenged in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. Leaving the serene bubble of the lounge, the stewards made their way towards the boarding area for GSA Flight 118 to Geneva. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The calm was replaced by the low-grade, anxious hum of a full flight preparing for departure. Gate 42 was crowded a sea of travelers in various states of anticipation and exhaustion. The stewards, refreshed from their time in the lounge, navigated the throng with practiced ease. Behind the podium, standing as the sole gatekeeper to their journey, was Brenda Jenkins. Brenda was a woman in her late 50s who looked like she'd been poured into her uniform and had set in a permanent state of disapproval. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a rigid helmet. Her makeup was a thick mask that failed to hide the deep-set lines of perpetual dissatisfaction around her mouth, and her name tag was pinned just slightly crooked. She had worked for GSA for 23 years, and in that time her initial enthusiasm for travel and customer service had eroded, replaced by a cynical and resentful sense of entitlement. She saw her job not as a facilitator of journeys, but as a position of power. She was the arbiter, the one who decided who got on and who didn't, and she wielded her minuscule authority like a cudgel. Her eyes scanned the crowd with a predator's focus, categorizing and judging. Businessmen in rumpled suits, loud college students, frantic families. And then she saw the Stewarts, a handsome, well-dressed black family. The man was tall and confident in a tailored blazer. The woman exuded an aura of quiet intelligence, her dress elegant but understated. The children were neat, well-behaved, holding shiny first-class ticket sleeves, and they were walking directly towards the priority boarding lane. Something curdled inside Brenda. It was an ugly, familiar feeling, a toxic cocktail of envy and prejudice. In her worldview, a family like this in first class didn't compute. It didn't fit the narrative she'd constructed in her head. They must have gotten lucky, or used some sort of loophole, or maybe the tickets weren't even theirs. The thought solidified into a certainty in her mind. As Amara approached the podium with a warm, polite smile, boarding passes in hand, Brenda held up a palm, stopping her short. "The pre-boarding for families with small children is over," she said, her voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "You'll have to wait for your boarding group." Amara's smile didn't falter, though she registered the curtness. "Oh, that's fine," she replied pleasantly. "We're in Group 1. I just had a quick question about—" Brenda cut her off, her eyes flicking down to the first-class tickets in Amara's hand, and then back up to her face. The look was appraising, dismissive. "Group 1 hasn't been called. Please step out of the lane." She didn't look at Amara as she spoke, instead focusing on rearranging a stack of papers on her desk. David, who had been helping Zoe with her backpack, stepped forward, sensing the shift in tone. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "My wife was just asking a question." Brenda finally lifted her head, her gaze sweeping over David with the same disdain. "And I told her the lane is closed. You're blocking access for the passengers in wheelchairs we need to pre-board." Amara glanced behind them. The lane was empty. There were no wheelchairs in sight. This wasn't a procedural issue. It was personal. She had encountered this brand of subtle dismissive racism before, the microaggressions designed to make you feel small, to put you in your place. She usually let them slide, not because they didn't sting, but because engaging was often a losing battle. But today, with her children watching, something felt different. "There's no one behind us," Amara stated, her voice still even. "My question is simply about the meal service. My son has a slight nut allergy, and I wanted to confirm the note is on our reservation." This was a direct professional request, one Brenda dealt with 100 times a day. But from Amara, it seemed to her an affront. Brenda let out an exaggerated sigh, a performance for the other passengers now beginning to watch. "Allergies should have been confirmed at check-in. I don't have time to recheck every single passenger's dietary needs. You can ask the flight attendant once you're on board." The dismissal was total. It was clear Brenda had no intention of helping them. She was creating a problem where none existed. "Okay," Amara said, deciding to de-escalate. "We'll wait for Group 1 to be called." She gathered her family, and they stepped to the side near the large window overlooking the tarmac. Zoe tugged on her sleeve. "Mummy, why was that lady so grumpy?" she whispered. "Some people just have bad days, sweetie," Amara murmured, though she knew it was more than that. It was the familiar sting of being treated as other, as less than. David wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Don't let her get to you," he said in a low voice. "We'll be on the plane in 10 minutes, and we'll never see her again." They watched as Brenda made a great show of her duties, her voice becoming saccharine sweet when she addressed an elderly white couple, then reverting to a clipped, impatient tone with a young man who appeared to be of South Asian descent. The pattern was undeniable. Finally, the announcement crackled over the PA system. "We are now pleased to invite our first-class passengers, as well as our Diamond Medallion members, to begin boarding at Gate 42. This was their cue. David gave Amara a reassuring squeeze, and they approached the podium again, joining the short line that was forming. When it was their turn, Amara placed their 4 boarding passes on the scanner. Brenda picked them up, her fingers moving with a deliberate slowness. She looked from the names on the tickets, Dr. Amara Stewart, David Stewart, to their faces, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "I need to see your passports," she demanded. Amara handed them over. Brenda scrutinized them, opening each one, comparing the photos to their faces, with an exaggerated, almost comical intensity, as if she were a customs agent searching for a fugitive. She held Amara's professional passport for a long moment, her eyes lingering on the doctor title. She handed them back. I'm going to need to see the credit card that was used to purchase these tickets. The request was so out of left field, so beyond standard procedure, that Amara was momentarily stunned into silence. A bubble of cold silence seemed to expand around the Stewart family. David, who had been managing Leo's wriggling excitement, stepped forward. "I'm sorry, what was that?" he asked, his voice low and steady, a warning bell tolling beneath the surface of his words. "The credit card," Brenda repeated, her voice louder, now attracting more attention from the surrounding passengers. "The one used for the purchase. It's airline policy. We need to verify that these tickets weren't purchased fraudulently." Amara's mind raced. In all her years of extensive travel for conferences, for leisure, for visiting family, she had never once been asked to produce the original credit card at the gate, especially not after her identity had been verified with a passport. It was a flagrant, targeted escalation. "We purchased these tickets with frequent flyer miles." Amara explained, her professional calm still intact, though it was costing her dearly. "There was a small charge for taxes and fees, which was paid with my husband's card, but the bulk of the transaction was miles." "Then I need to see the card for the taxes," Brenda insisted, her chin jutting out. "And I'll need to see the account statement showing the mileage withdrawal." "Policy." David's jaw tightened. "That is absolutely not policy. We have valid boarding passes and verified passports. We are flying first class. We are not a security risk." He emphasized the words first class, not as a boast, but as a clear indicator of their status within the airline's own system, a status that should have afforded them the smoothest experience, not the most hostile. Brenda's lips twisted into a smirk. It was a small, ugly expression, but it conveyed everything. "I have the power here. You don't belong. Sir, if you can't provide the verification I'm requesting, I cannot allow you to board. Now, are you going to comply? Or are you going to hold up the entire flight?" The situation was spiraling. Other passengers were openly staring now, some with sympathy, others with impatience. Zoe's lower lip began to tremble as she clutched her mother's hand. Leo, sensing the tension, had stopped bouncing and was now hiding behind David's leg. Amara knew she was being goaded. Brenda wanted a reaction. She wanted them to get angry, to yell, to cause a scene that would justify her calling security and having them removed. It was a classic playbook of provocation. Amara would not give her the satisfaction. She took a deep breath. "This is highly irregular, but fine." She turned to David. "Honey, do you have the Amex card you used?" David, seething but controlled, pulled out his wallet. He found the card and placed it on the counter. "There. Now can we please board? Our children are getting upset." Brenda picked up the card, her unmanicured nails tapping against the plastic. She squinted at the name. David Stewart. She then looked at the 4 boarding passes she still held in her other hand. She seemed to be searching for a discrepancy, any excuse to continue her crusade. When she found none, a flicker of frustration crossed her face. For a moment, it seemed she would have to concede that the Stewarts had called her bluff. But Brenda Jenkins was not a woman who conceded. Her prejudice was a deeper well than simple procedure. She had already decided who this family was, and she would bend reality to fit her conclusion. "This is just for the taxes," she said, dismissively, pushing the card back across the counter. "The primary value of these tickets is in the miles. How did you acquire so many miles?" The question was so astoundingly inappropriate, so deeply offensive, that even David was at a loss for words. It was a direct accusation. "You couldn't have possibly earned this." Amara's composure finally fractured not into anger, but into an icy, diamond-hard resolve. "That is none of your business," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than a shout. "My husband and I are both frequent international travelers for our professions. We earned our status and our miles through years of loyalty to this airline. An airline that you are doing a very poor job of representing right now." That was it. The challenge to her authority, the direct criticism, was the final spark. Brenda's face contorted with a vicious rage. "Unbelievable!" Brenda spat out, her voice dripping with venom. "The entitlement! You people waltz in here, thinking you can buy your way into anything, and then you get aggressive when someone asks a simple question." And then she did it. With a sharp, theatrical motion, she took the 4 boarding passes in her hand, and with a flick of her wrist, she tore them in half. Rip! The sound was shockingly loud in the tense silence. She then tore the halves again, creating 4 small, mangled squares from each pass. She threw the pieces onto the counter, where they scattered, and a few fluttered to the floor at Amara's feet. "Your tickets have been cancelled due to passenger non-compliance and belligerent behavior," Brenda announced, her chest heaving. "You will not be flying to Geneva today, or any day. I'm putting a permanent note on your file. Now please step away from my gate before I call security." The world seemed to stop. The collective gasp from the passengers was audible. David stood frozen, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, a vein throbbing in his temple. But the most devastating sound was the one that came from beside Amara. It was a small, heartbroken sob. Zoe was crying, her face buried in her mother's side, her little body shaking. "Mommy," she wept. "She broke our tickets. We can't see the mountains." Leo, seeing his sister's distress, also began to cry, a wail of confusion and fear. Seeing her children's tears, something inside Amara Stewart shifted. The surgeon's cool detachment, the professional's practiced patience, all of it fell away, replaced by the primal, unyielding force of a mother bear whose cubs had been threatened. The humiliation, the injustice, the blatant racism, it all coalesced into a single point of cold, clear action. She knelt and hugged her children tightly. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice miraculously steady. "Mummy is going to fix this. I promise you. We are going to see the mountains." She stood up, her eyes locking onto Brenda's. There was no fear in her gaze, no anger, just a terrifying, profound certainty. Brenda, high on her power trip, mistook the calm for defeat. She smirked, ready for them to slink away in shame. Amara reached into her purse, but she didn't pull out a wallet or a tissue. She pulled out her phone. "You've made a mistake," Amara said, her voice as quiet and sharp as a scalpel. "You just don't know how big it is yet." She turned her back to the counter, shielding the phone with her body, and scrolled through her contacts. She found the name she was looking for. She pressed the call button completely, ignoring Brenda's sputtering demand for her to leave the area. The phone rang once. Twice a voice answered, warm and familiar. "Amara Bug. You should be in the air by now. Everything all right?" Amara closed her eyes for a second, drawing strength from the voice. "Hi, Uncle Bob," she said, her voice still trembling slightly but gaining strength. "I'm sorry to bother you. We're having a bit of a problem at JFK." Behind her, Brenda Jenkins laughed, a short barking sound. "Oh, here we go," she said loudly to her colleague at the next gate. "She's calling her Uncle Bob. How precious." Amara ignored her. "Yes," she continued into the phone, "with a GSA agent at gate 42. Her name is Brenda Jenkins." She paused, listening. "No, it's pretty bad. She just tore up our first-class tickets to Geneva in front of my children. Another pause. Amara's face was unreadable. Yes, I'm sure. I'm looking right at the pieces. No, we were perfectly compliant. Then she said the words that would detonate Brenda Jenkins's entire world. No, I haven't told them who you are. I didn't think it should be necessary. Yes, Captain Henderson. I'll hold. The name hung in the air for a moment, meaningless to most of the passengers who were now openly recording the scene on their phones. But to anyone who worked for Global Sky Alliance, or indeed anyone in the commercial aviation industry, the name Captain Henderson was legendary. Captain Robert Bob Henderson was not just a retired pilot. He was an icon. He was the man who had safely landed a GSA 747 in a storm in Hong Kong, with 2 engines out, saving 398 souls. He had been the chief of flight safety for a decade, rewriting the airline's emergency protocols. After retiring from flying, he hadn't faded into a quiet life of golf and fishing. He had taken a position on the GSA board of directors. He was not just a board member. He was the board member, the conscience of the airline, the head of the Safety Ethics and Customer Experience Oversight Committee. He was the man the CEO called for advice. His face was on plaques in every training facility. He was, for all intents and purposes, untouchable, a living embodiment of the airline's best self. And Dr. Amara Stewart had just called him Uncle Bob. Brenda Jenkins didn't process it at first. The name Henderson was common enough. She was still riding the adrenaline high of her confrontation, feeling smug and victorious. She had put the entitled family in their place. She had enforced her authority. Her colleague, a younger agent named Maria from the adjacent gate, sidled over her eyes wide. "Brenda, what did you do?" She whispered, an edge of panic in her voice. "You can't just tear up tickets." "They were belligerent and non-compliant," Brenda snapped, though her confidence was beginning to waver under Maria's fearful gaze. "I followed protocol for disruptive passengers." "Did she just say Captain Henderson?" Maria pressed her face, paling. "As in the Captain Henderson?" It was then that the gears in Brenda's mind began to turn slowly and horribly. She looked over at Amara, who was standing calmly by the window phone, to her ear murmuring quietly. She remembered the doctor on the passport, the quiet confidence, the expensive understated clothes, the casual mention of being a frequent international traveler for her profession. It wasn't the behavior of a scammer. It was the behavior of someone who belonged. The puzzle pieces began to slam into place, forming a picture of absolute horror. Amara's voice rose just enough for Brenda to hear. "Yes, that's right. She's right here. About 5'5", blonde hair, late 50s. Name tag, it says Brenda." Brenda felt a sensation like ice water being poured down her spine. The blood drained from her face, leaving her makeup standing out like a garish mask on a grey canvas. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic trapped bird. It couldn't be. It was a bluff, a coincidence. Then Amara said, "Okay, he wants to speak to the GSA station manager, immediately." She lowered her phone, and her eyes, dark and piercing, found Brenda's. The look in them was not one of triumph, but of profound, sorrowful disappointment. It was the look of a surgeon who had lost a patient to a preventable mistake. The internal phone at the gate podium began to ring, its shrill, insistent chirp cutting through the murmur of the crowd. It was a direct line from the central operations tower. Brenda stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely reach for the receiver. "Gate 42, Jenkins," she stammered into the phone. The voice on the other end was not calm. It was a bark, filled with a level of panic Brenda had never heard from her supervisor, Ken Peterson, the JFK station manager. "Brenda, what in God's name is going on at your gate? I just got a call from corporate." "No, not from corporate, from God himself. Robert Henderson's office just called my personal cell phone. He's on the line with the Executive Vice President of North American Operations. They're asking about a Dr. Stewart and her family." Brenda's throat went dry. She couldn't form words. All she could manage was a choked squeak. "Are they still there?" Ken yelled through the phone. "The Stewart family. Do not let them leave. Do whatever they want. Apologize. Grovel. I don't care. I'm on my way. If you have done what I think you have done, Brenda, so help me God." The line went dead. Brenda placed the receiver back in its cradle with a hand that felt like a clumsy prosthetic. Her carefully constructed world of petty tyranny had just been obliterated by a single phone call. The power she had so enjoyed wielding was revealed to be a fragile illusion. She was a minnow who had tried to bite a shark, and now the entire ocean was coming down on her. She looked up at the Stewart family. David was now shielding them, his body, a protective barrier between his wife and children, and the scene unfolding. He was looking at Brenda with an expression of pure, undiluted contempt. Amara was back on the phone, her voice soft and reassuring. "He's on his way, Uncle Bob. Yes, the kids are shaken, but we're okay. Thank you. It means a lot." Uncle Bob. The Henderson Aviation Grant was a scholarship Amara had won in medical school, a grant established by Captain Henderson to support promising students. He had become her mentor, a father figure, the uncle her children had known their entire lives. He had attended her wedding. He had held Zoe and Leo as newborns. He was family. And Brenda Jenkins had just humiliated his family. The enormity of her miscalculation crashed down on her. She had not targeted a random family. She had, in her blind prejudice, assaulted the chosen family of a corporate deity. The torn pieces of paper on the floor were no longer just tickets. They were a signed confession of her career suicide. The sneer was gone from her face, replaced by a mask of sheer abject terror. She opened her mouth to say something, an apology, an excuse, a plea, but no sound came out. She was no longer the gatekeeper. She was the prisoner on death row, waiting for the warden to arrive, and she could hear his footsteps approaching fast. The arrival of Ken Peterson, the GSA JFK station manager, was not subtle. He was a portly man in a slightly too tight suit, who normally moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a manager comfortable in his domain. Today, he moved like a man running from a fire. His face flushed a sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the terminal's air conditioning. He burst through the crowd of onlookers, his eyes scanning wildly until they locked onto the Stewart family. He ignored Brenda completely, treating her as if she were a piece of furniture. He walked directly to Amara and David, his hands held up in a gesture of placation. "Dr. Stewart, Mr. Stewart," he panted, his voice strained. "I am Ken Peterson, the station manager. I cannot begin to express how profoundly sorry I am. There are no words. This is an unacceptable, horrifying failure on our part." Amara ended her call with Captain Henderson and met Ken's panicked gaze with a calm, unreadable expression. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice even, "your employee, Ms. Jenkins, has just accused us of fraud, refused us boarding, and destroyed our tickets in front of our children." Ken flinched at every word, as if they were physical blows. "I know. I was just made aware. This is not GSA. This is not who we are. Please allow me to rectify this immediately." He turned to a younger, bewildered-looking gate agent who had been watching the scene unfold. You get on the radio. Tell Captain Davies on Flight 118 they are on a ground hold by order of the Executive VP's office. The flight is not to push back from the gate until I give the word. Tell him it's a customer service situation at the highest level." He then whirled around to face Brenda for the first time. The desperate, pleading demeanor he had shown the stewards vanished, replaced by a fury so cold it was terrifying. "Brenda," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Give me your ID, your security badge, now." Brenda just stared at him, her mouth agape, seemingly paralyzed. "Now, Jenkins!" he roared, and this time she jumped, fumbling at her lanyard with trembling fingers. She unclipped it and handed it over. He snatched it from her hand. "You are suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation," he said, his voice dropping again. "You will be escorted from the airport. You are not to speak to anyone. You are not to access any company systems. Do you understand me?" Brenda nodded numbly, her eyes wide with shock. "Get your personal belongings from your locker. 2 security officers will meet you there. You are to leave the premises and not return." He didn't wait for a response, turning his back on her completely. For him, she no longer existed. He then focused all his attention back on the stewards, his face softening into a mask of profound concern. "Dr. Stewart, first and foremost. What can I do for your children? Is there anything they need? The lounge is at your disposal, of course. We can have food, toys, anything you want, brought there." David spoke up, his voice tight with controlled rage. "What our children need is to not be traumatized at the start of their vacation. What they need is to not see their parents humiliated because of the color of their skin." Ken visibly paled. "Mr. Stewart, I assure you GSA has a zero-tolerance policy. Your zero-tolerance policy just tore up my daughter's dream of seeing the mountains." David shot back, gesturing to the scraps of paper on the floor. Ken looked down at the torn tickets as if they were evidence at a murder scene. He knelt, his knees cracking, and began to pick them up piece by piece as if they were sacred relics. It was a pathetic performative act of contrition, and everyone knew it. "We will of course be reissuing your tickets," he said, standing up, "and upgrading you, though I see that's not possible as you are already in our highest class of service." He looked utterly helpless. He was a man with a checklist for solving problems: offer miles, give vouchers, upgrade seats, and he had encountered a situation where none of it applied. This wasn't a lost bag or a delayed flight. This was a moral injury. "Please," he begged, "come with me to the lounge. Let my team handle your luggage. We'll get you on your way. The flight will wait for you for as long as it takes." Amara looked at her children. Zoe was still quiet, her face streaked with tears. Leo was confused and scared. Her priority now was them. Her point had been made. The consequences were already in motion. "Fine," Amara said. "We'll go to the lounge. But I want to be clear, Mr. Peterson. This is not over. This is not something that can be fixed with a glass of champagne and a new set of tickets. What your employee did was not just poor customer service. It was a hate-fueled act of aggression, and we will be expecting a formal written response from your CEO's office explaining what GSA is going to do to ensure this never, ever happens to another family." "Yes, Dr. Stewart. Of course," Ken stammered. "You will have it. You have my word." As Ken personally escorted the Stewart family away from the gate and back toward the hushed sanctuary of the lounge, Brenda Jenkins stood alone at the podium. For a moment, a ghost at her own execution. Passengers who were supposed to be boarding the flight to Geneva stared at her, Some looked angry at the delay. Others looked at her with pity. Most looked at her with pure disgust. Her career, her 23 years of service, had ended in a flash of ugly prejudice. She was no longer Brenda Jenkins' senior gate agent. She was just Brenda, the woman who tore up a family's tickets, the racist gate agent, a viral video waiting to happen. She turned, and with the shuffling, defeated gait of a condemned prisoner, she walked away from the gate, heading toward a future that was as shredded and worthless as the paper on the floor. While the stewards were being settled into a private room in the flagship lounge, treated with a level of reverence usually reserved for royalty. The shockwaves of Brenda's actions were traveling upwards through the GSA corporate structure at the speed of light. At the GSA headquarters in Chicago, affectionately known as the Citadel, Executive Vice President of North American Operations, a hard-nosed executive named Harrison Cole, was pacing his 50th floor office, his phone pressed so hard to his ear it was a surprise it didn't crack. On the other end of the line was Captain Bob Henderson. Henderson's voice was not loud or angry. It was far worse. It was calm, precise, and heavy, with the weight of profound disappointment. "Harrison, I've known Amara Stewart since she was a teenager," Henderson said, his voice like gravel. "She is one of the most brilliant, compassionate, and composed human beings I have ever met. For her to be treated this way, for her children to be subjected to that, it's not just a breach of protocol. It is a stain on this company's soul." "Bob, I am on it," Cole assured him, his own voice tight with stress. He had already seen the preliminary report from JFK. He knew the names. He knew the basic facts. "The employee has been suspended. She will be terminated. There is no question." "Termination is a reaction, Harrison. It's not a solution," Henderson countered. "This isn't about one rotten apple. One rotten apple doesn't get the confidence to do something so brazen unless she feels the barrel she's in is at the very least tolerant of her rot. I've been hearing whispers for years, complaints that get buried, bias incidents that are written off as customer service misunderstandings. This time it happened to my family, and it happened in public. This is a cancer, Harrison. I want to know what you're going to do about the cancer, not just the tumor." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. By the time it was over, Harrison Cole had committed to a complete top-to-bottom review of GSA's anti-bias and de-escalation training programs to be overseen by an outside consulting firm, with the final report delivered directly to the board, specifically to Henderson's Ethics Committee. Meanwhile, another more volatile fire was starting to burn. One of the passengers at Gate 42, a tech blogger named Kevin Wu, had filmed the entire interaction on his phone, from Brenda's condescending demands to the final shocking act of tearing the tickets. He had a clear shot of Brenda's face, her name tag, and the Stewart children crying. As soon as he boarded the delayed flight, he connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, uploaded the video to his Twitter and YouTube channels with the title "GSA Gate Agent Tears Up Black Family's First-Class Tickets in Shocking Racist Incident at JFK." He tagged GSA major news outlets and several high-profile civil rights activists. Before Flight 118 was even over the Atlantic, the video had exploded. The footage was damning. Brenda's smug expression, the sound of the ripping paper. Zoe's heartbroken sobs. It was a visceral, infuriating tableau. By the time the Stewarts landed in Geneva, the story was the #1 trending topic in the United States. Gate Agent Brenda must fly GSA and Justice for Stewarts were trending worldwide. The GSA Public Relations Department was thrown into a 5-alarm crisis Their social media channels were inundated with a tidal wave of outrage. People were posting photos of themselves cutting up their GSA loyalty cards. Corporate clients began calling their CEOs, demanding to know what kind of company GSA was running. Rival airlines, smelling blood in the water, began running targeted ads offering status matches for disgruntled GSA flyers. The stock price, which had been stable, began to show signs of a dip in after-hours trading. The internal investigation into Brenda Jenkins was swift and brutal. They pulled her file. It was a tapestry of mediocrity dotted with minor customer complaints over the years. Many had a similar theme: rude, unhelpful, condescending. Several came from minority passengers, but they had always been dismissed by previous managers as subjective he said, she said situations. There was no single smoking gun, but a clear pattern of behavior that had been ignored for years. They interviewed Maria, the agent from the next gate, who tearfully recounted Brenda's long history of making derogatory comments about passengers of various ethnicities. They pulled the security camera footage from Gate 42. The video, silent but crystal clear, was even more damning than the cell phone footage. It showed the steward's calm and patient demeanor. It showed Brenda's escalating aggression. It showed there was no one in the wheelchair lane. It showed every one of Brenda's lies and provocations in stark, undeniable detail. There was no defense. The union representative assigned to Brenda's case reviewed the evidence and told her flatly that there was nothing they could do. She had committed an act so egregious so publicly that defending her would be professional suicide for the union itself. By the time the stewards sat down for their first dinner in Switzerland, trying to salvage the trip for their children, the official termination letter for Brenda Jenkins had already been signed, sealed and delivered by courier to her home in Queens. The first of many consequences had found its mark. The karma that befell Brenda Jenkins was not a single swift lightning bolt. It was a slow, grinding avalanche, meticulously burying every aspect of the life she had known under the immense weight of her own actions. The official termination letter arrived by courier the next afternoon, a crisp, impersonal document that felt heavier than a tombstone in her trembling hands. It outlined in cold legal prose her gross misconduct, citing malicious actions deliberately intended to cause reputational and financial harm. That phrase, she would later learn, was the legal key that allowed GSA to void the majority of her severance and pension benefits. 23 years of her life of showing up, of dealing with irate passengers and monotonous routines, had been reduced to the bare minimum payout required by state law. The nest egg she had meticulously built, the one she believed she was owed, had vanished. Her public life disintegrated even faster. The viral video, a permanent digital ghost, haunted every interaction. A trip to her local supermarket became a gauntlet of whispers and pointed fingers. A woman in the dairy aisle, recognizing her, loudly remarked to her husband, "Look, honey, it's that horrible racist woman from the airport. Can you believe the nerve?" Brenda, her face burning with shame, abandoned her half-full cart and fled. She became a prisoner in her own home, the drawn blinds a flimsy defense against the news vans parked outside, and the vitriol pouring into her online world. Her attempt to create a new social media profile under a different name was futile. Internet sleuths identified it in hours, flooding it with screenshots of her at Gate 42. She had sought a moment of power over one family, and in turn had made herself a powerless pariah to millions. Finding new employment was an exercise in futility. In her first and only interview for a customer service manager position at a hotel chain, the hiring manager, a kind-faced man named Mr. Davies, paused halfway through. He looked down at her resume, then back at her, a look of dawning recognition in his eyes. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Brenda Jenkins," he said slowly. "Forgive me for asking, but were you recently employed at JFK?" The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. When Brenda numbly nodded, he sighed and gently pushed her resume back across the desk. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice laced with pity. "But we can't. The risk is just too great." Within 6 months, financially and emotionally broken, she sold her small house in Queens for less than it was worth, desperate for the cash. She packed what was left of her life into a used sedan and drove to Ohio to move into the spare bedroom of her younger sister's house. She was a specter of her former self, a woman stripped not only of her job and reputation, but of the very identity she had clung to for 2 decades. In the quiet, lonely nights, she would replay the events at Gate 42, a toxic loop of regret. At first, she blamed the stewards for being uppity, her manager for not supporting her, the passenger for filming. But as the months wore on, the excuses wore thin, leaving only the stark, ugly truth of her own prejudice staring back at her from the dark. For the stewards, the path forward was one of purposeful repair, not just for themselves, but for a system that had allowed a person like Brenda to wield power. GSA's CEO, Mark O'Connell, a man who projected an aura of boardroom invincibility, appeared humbled and genuinely shaken when he met them in the sitting room of their Geneva hotel suite. He met their gaze directly, his corporate Polish stripped away, leaving only a man faced with a profound moral failure. "Dr. Stewart, Mr. Stewart," he began, foregoing any preamble. "I flew here to apologize in person because an email or a phone call would be an insult to what you and your children endured. What happened at JFK is the single greatest failure of our customer promise I have witnessed in my tenure as CEO. It was a failure of systems, a failure of training, and a catastrophic failure of basic human decency. And it is my personal responsibility to fix it." Amara listened, her expression calm but resolute. "Mr. O'Connell," she began, her surgeon's precision evident in her tone, "what your employee did was not a failure of our customer promise. It was an act of hate. She saw a black family in first class and decided we didn't belong. Let's not sanitize that reality. The question isn't just how you apologize to us, but how you will fundamentally change the culture that made her feel empowered to do that." David added, his arm resting protectively on his wife's shoulder. "Our children now have a memory of their parents being humiliated for no reason. Our son is scared of people in uniforms. Our daughter asked me why that lady hated us. No apology erases that. We're here to talk about what you're going to build from the rubble your employee created." The conversation was not about miles or vouchers. It was about substantive change. And when the topic of a financial settlement arose, GSA's offer was substantial, a number clearly meant to convey the depth of their apology. That evening, Amara and David discussed it. "We can't take it," Amara said, simply looking out at the shimmering lights of Geneva. "We will not profit from our own pain or our children's. It would feel dirty." "I agree," David said, "but we can use it. We can direct it." When they met with O'Connell the next day, they delivered their decision. They would accept the settlement on one non-negotiable condition: the entire sum would be donated to the Henderson Aviation Grant. Amara watched the CEO's eyes widen as she explained the connection. "That grant, established by Captain Henderson, helped put me through medical school," she said. "It changed my life. Now this money, born from an act of prejudice, We'll establish a new scholarship program, a diversity in aviation initiative in our family's name to help young people of color become the pilots, executives, and engineers of GSA's future. It was a piece of poetic justice, a full circle moment that was not lost on anyone. They finished their vacation in the Alps with a renewed sense of purpose. The memory of Gate 42 was a scar, but they refused to let it define their journey. One afternoon, high on a mountain pass, Zoe sat nestled against her father, her sketchbook open, her watercolors capturing the majestic peak of the Matterhorn. Amara watched her, seeing the healing power of beauty and peace. Leo, his fears momentarily forgotten, engaged in a fierce snowball fight with his mother, his laughter echoing in the crisp, clean air. They were reclaiming their joy. On the flight home, the captain, a veteran pilot named Frank, personally came back to their seats. He knelt to be at eye level with the children. "I heard about what happened," he said, his voice gentle. "And I wanted to tell you that woman does not represent us. This uniform stands for getting families to their adventures safely. And on my plane, you are the most important people here." Before they landed, he invited Leo into the cockpit, letting him wear the co-pilot's headset, a small act of kindness that began to mend the little boy's fear. GSA's internal changes, driven by Captain Henderson's relentless oversight from his seat on the board, were sweeping. The Stewart Protocol, as it became known, was integrated into every level of training. It included VR simulations that put agents in the exact scenario the stewards faced, grading them on their ability to de-escalate and serve with impartiality. A new duty to intervene policy was enacted, empowering and protecting employees who reported biased behavior from their colleagues. Captain Henderson himself sat in on the development sessions, ensuring the changes were not just cosmetic but a fundamental rewiring of the company's DNA. In the end, a single ugly act of racism at Gate 42 did not just shatter one woman's career and traumatize a family. It forced a corporate giant to its knees, compelling it to look in the mirror and confront the reflection. It sparked a reckoning that led to real, tangible change, making the skies a little friendlier and the promise of a dream vacation a little more secure for every family that dared to fly. The story of the Stewart family and the gate agent at JFK is a stark and powerful reminder that our actions, no matter how small we think they are, can have monumental consequences. It shows us that prejudice and hate, when brought into the light, cannot stand against the force of dignity and integrity. Brenda Jenkins thought she was exercising a moment of power over a family she deemed unworthy. But all she did was expose her own deep-seated ugliness to the world, triggering a karma that was as swift as it was devastating. Conversely, Dr. Amara Stewart, in a moment of extreme duress, chose not to descend to that level. Instead, she used her intelligence, her connections, and her grace to not only right a wrong for her own family, but to spark a meaningful institutional change that would benefit countless others. This wasn't just about a ruined vacation. It was about defending the simple, fundamental right to be treated with respect. If this story of justice and accountability moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Let us know in the comments below if you've ever witnessed or experienced a situation like this. Your stories matter, and most importantly, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next video. Thank you for listening.